Hey everybody, welcome back to the Field Guys podcast, your source for the best sports minds since Jerry Krause. We are your hosts, Max Jensen and Cameron Curran, coming to you here on this fine Tuesday evening. Today's main podcast discussion will be surrounding the new Michael Jordan docu-series. It's been interesting for us two youngins to learn about the greatest of all time. Before we start, make sure to subscribe, turn on that bell so you get all the notifications, and let's get into it. So,
Yeah.
our overall first impressions, Max. You can start. What are your overall first impressions of this document series?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting for people like us to watch because we never got to experience Michael Jordan's career, and I've always gotten the impression from other people like Michael Jordan's the greatest, like whatever, but I've never really seen him in action. And after watching last night, just the first couple episodes, like I get what people are talking about. Like not only is he amazing on the floor, but the mental aspect of his game, right? He's a hard worker, probably the hardest worker we've ever seen in the sports industry. So I thought it was really cool to watch. I'm not super big into the NBA right now. I don't watch a ton of it. But it's definitely going to spark up some conversations with the whole LeBron MJ debate that I'm definitely here for.
I mean, I always heard people like the radio hosts and other podcast hosts act like MJ was just the default to number one. And with LeBron, like even with LeBron coming up, they still kind of acted like MJ was the default number one. And for a while, I always kind of just assumed like that's their generation, that's their best. Our generation is LeBron. It's two separate things, and no one's gonna go for someone who they didn't grow up with. No one's gonna go for someone whose prime didn't happen like in their era. But I was wrong. I, I think there's a difference between, and I always defaulted to LeBron because I never got to watch Jordan in action. It was hard for me to say someone I never watched was the best player of all time. And watching that, it's kind of hard to debate. There seemed to be this other gear that like only he and Kobe could hit, and
Yeah.
no other athlete is able to hit that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in terms of just pure talent, they're probably around the same level. Probably give the slight edge to Michael, but they're probably around the same level in terms of just pure talent. I think the thing that sets them apart is that last gear that you could hit that no one can hit except for, I think, Kobe and Michael.
Yeah, I think Michael probably has the better talent, and LeBron has just the physical. Like he's taller, he's probably a lot stronger. Another thing about Michael Jordan that's super interesting is he's had really rough up and coming. Right, he was cut from his high school team. There was problems highlighted with his brother and his dad, um, and then obviously the whole GM and owner debacle. So he's really had a rough time. I don't know if LeBron's had that. He's obviously had the spotlight on him since he was 16, but it's definitely very different. Sort of their career paths, I think.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to see how people are reacting to it looking back, because you wonder what changes between getting cut from varsity basketball and getting recruited to UNC, like with Dean Smith. I mean, people were I heard this quote at least 3 different times where people would say we had heard about him, there wasn't too much hype around him, and then he came on and you could tell he was the best player on like in the game.
Yeah.
And you wonder yourself, if you saw that immediately and it happened every time he moved to a new team from high school to college, from college to the NBA, why was there not more hype surrounding him. And I don't know if it was because of his size, because I know people were talking about, they had like interviews with players talking about how they didn't know if Michael could carry a team because of his size and because of his play style, and if that was the the reason that he didn't get too much attention. And it's interesting for us to sit here and act like the number 3 overall pick isn't a lot of attention, and to be recruited to UNC isn't a lot of attention. But the feeling I got from the documentary is that's what it was like. Like he was almost, even for such a high stock, he was still at that level being underrated, which is insane to me. Because like when you compare him to LeBron, LeBron was in the spotlight in high school. He had like ESPN televised games in high school. He was the first round pick. He got to like create his own big three in Miami after being a star in Cleveland. And after that, he kind of controlled like the team he was on. In Cleveland, the second time around, he controlled the team. And the fact that Michael coming up didn't have those same luxuries is very interesting to me, especially when people knew that he was going to be an insane talent.
Yeah, and maybe he used all those struggles and whatnot as sort of motivation, right? That toughness, that sort of edge that he always has to him. Maybe that's because he's been through all this. And there's a quote from Jordan that is awesome, and it fits him perfectly. So he was talking about like never turning it off for a single game, and he said he never wanted to turn it off because every game there could be a new fan in the stands that had never seen him play before and had paid a bunch of money to come see him play. So he wanted to play hard for him or her,
Yeah.
whoever's coming to the games. So I think that represents Jordan well, and just his whole mentality of never turning it off. And when he came up, I think it was like his third career game that they showed where he had that crazy comeback.
But yeah.
Sort of like his teammates were giving up, and he's like, "What are you doing, guys? Like, this is an important game." They're all like, "It's the third game, whatever." And I thought that was really cool. And that's sort of why I lean towards college basketball, just from a watching standpoint, because I feel like every game, and I'm not saying that NBA doesn't give 100%, but every game they're like playing their hearts out, and
Right.
every game is competitive, which I like to watch. I don't know what you think about.
Yeah, I've always been, this is kind of a little tangent, but I've always been a bigger college basketball fan
Yeah.
just because it feels, I don't know if this makes sense, it feels more genuine. Like when those kids are playing, it feels like a more genuine game than the NBA does.
Hmm.
Like you were alluded to, the NBA, you see players sitting for strategic resting, trying to play for the playoffs. You see
Tanking.
like teams like Kawhi and Chris Paul sitting like, significant amounts of games. You see tanking, right? And in college basketball, it's just every single game, no matter what your record is, you're putting your heart into it.
Yeah.
And I don't think I don't think you get that same passion in the NBA except for a few players who turn out to be, in most cases, the ones we remember.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and I think getting back to that whole Jordan mentality, having he did not make like the Chicago Bulls didn't make it to and win a finals until 92. He was, or was it 91? It was one of those 2 years, but he was drafted in 84. So that's 7 or 8 years of playoffs and losing, mediocre team and losing, waiting for the right pieces to fall. He played 7 to 8 years of fantastic basketball without winning something. And the fact that after that, he still had a significant amount of time where he was winning championships and he was the most elite player on the team is insane.
Yeah, definitely. And that whole transition from college to the NBA was definitely different for MJ. I guess they called the his teammates, that first team, the traveling cocaine circus. Right, he gave that little story where he was invited to the hotel room or whatever, and they were just in there having a good time, and he didn't want any of it. And I thought that not only is that a little funny, but it's good. Like that's what you want as like a GM, as a fan. You want that player that's like, my mind is on playing basketball and nothing else.
It's rare you see someone like that
Hmm.
who hasn't let the spotlight affect them to at least some degree. And it seemed like he never really got like watered down by the spotlight, which is insane. Um, and I think the biggest, I don't want to say the biggest, but I think the most underrated thing about Jordan's career and the dynasty of the Chicago Bulls themselves, and the thing that people seem to forget, and I didn't even know about, was how valuable Scottie Pippen's, not only his skill set, but his contract was to building that dynasty. 7 years, 18 million. They got a top 10 NBA player in the league, the greatest number two of all time, for free. And people always talk about how Jordan built this dynasty and it was all Jordan with the help of Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman. And obviously, Jordan was a centerpiece, but if Scottie Pippen signs the deal he's worth, if he's making bank like he obviously deserved, can the Bulls afford to bring in those extra pieces that they need? Can they afford to keep Rodman? Can they afford to bring in all those extra pieces that they needed? Right? The Patriots dynasty was built in part because Brady was willing to take pay cuts. Brady was willing to not be selfish and not get the money he probably deserved and let other probably more rare elite players, such as elite cornerbacks, you don't see that many of them, get paid. He was willing to take that pay cut so that they could build a franchise. And I think the Bulls got very lucky. It was the perfect storm of drafting one of the greatest talents of all time and getting another all-time talent on the like one of the cheapest contracts of all time. I mean, that entire dynasty, I think that is the second most important part of the dynasty behind Jordan and his skill set.
Yeah, definitely, because Jordan didn't win without Pippen or Phil Jackson. Um, but yeah, back to that contract, they got the steal of like history. Like that's
Yeah.
insane that they were able to lock him up. And I know Scottie Pippen obviously had a big family, and 18 million, um, that's gonna light your eyes up, especially in the 90s or 80s or whenever he signed that contract. Um, but 7 years, I mean, we rarely see players sign for that much, especially for this small amount of money. Um, but he made that one little mistake, or his agent made that one little mistake, and it really cost, him a ton of money. Um, but yeah, the GM and owner, the fact that they didn't renegotiate, it's crazy. It kind of blows my mind.
I mean, would you, if you had Scottie Pippen on
Yeah,
this cheap contract, like would you renegotiate? Be like, yeah, I'll pay you more.
yeah, because we saw the effects. He demanded a trade. He was
Yeah,
not
but
happy.
if you're demanding a trade from Scottie Pippen, who by the way they already thought was like at the end of his lifeline, and you're getting rid of Phil Jackson, and you probably have a feeling that Jordan's gone because he's already told you he's not playing without Phil Jackson. Like, do you even bother trying to hold on to what you have left, or do you kind of just roll with it?
At that point, no, but I disagree with the GM's like whole theory. Why are you getting rid of Phil Jackson? Why are you
Oh,
saying this
no,
is
I'm
the
not
end of the
debating that.
dynasty? Like I
That was
don't.
an awful decision. That was just selfishness and ego.
Yeah. Um, but I see what you're saying. me as a GM, I'm not a GM, but if I were, I'd want my players to be happy. I want a good culture. And what's crazy is that they were able to win like what 6 championships despite the fact that ownership and the players were not on the same page, and they sort of had like a really high tension between them. So
Yeah,
that makes the titles even more um, interesting to look at.
especially since you look at it and that second three-peat that the Bulls had, that team was probably better than the first three-peat.
Mm-hmm.
So you had all this tension rising, and through that, they were still the greatest team in history, greater than they were with the first three-peat when there didn't seem to be as much tension.
Yeah. And then another big storyline of the first 2 episodes was Jordan's injury. He obviously had that big foot injury that sidelined him for the back half of that one season.
Yeah, I didn't even know he
Um,
had that. I didn't
right.
know it was ever a
I
thing.
didn't know that either. And that was the first time he'd ever missed a game since like high school. So it was obviously very different for him. Someone that always wants to go in there and compete. Um, but he obviously sat out for a little while, and then the doctor like cleared him. They said there's a 90% chance you're not going to get injured, but there's a 10% chance you could get that career-ending injury. And of course, Jordan, being the guy he is like, I'm going out there, man.
Yeah.
I don't care what you guys say. But the owner, being cautious and probably making the right choice, says, let's ease into it a little bit.
I think he made the right choice there. I
Yeah.
obviously you don't want to push someone back into full games right after an injury. And I'm not against the idea of playing 7 minutes a half, but the way they enforced it was
Yeah.
was insane. I'm not against the rule itself. I thought the way they carried it out was really weird.
Yeah,
Like
because the last 14 seconds that you
right.
can't even put them in for 14 seconds. I think there needs to be a little bit of leeway there, probably.
Yeah, I mean that was obviously demonstration of some of that early tension that was within that organization. But
Yeah, yeah, and we
I
saw
mean,
um me being a Nats fan. I saw this in 2012 with Steven Strasburg. He obviously had
okay.
Tommy John, but what's interesting and what is a little different between the two, um, the Bulls. I mean, they ended up making the playoffs at 30 and 52, which is crazy, but they
Yeah.
weren't really making a strong playoff push. And in 2012 with the Nationals, they were the number 1 seed. Like they were making a strong push, but their number 1 pitcher's coming off Tommy John surgery, and they ended up playing it cautious and resting him.
And
Um,
what they do?
they lost in the
They
first round,
lost. They blew it.
but
Yeah.
Steven Strasburg just recently signed a contract with the Nats, and one thing that he's always praised them for is
Yeah.
um, helping him out and really looking out for his career and his injuries. And he says they did a really good job.
Well,
So
aren't they sweet?
yeah,
Maybe it's why they lose all the time.
Cameron,
Ever consider that? Ever consider that? Maybe you guys need to just be more
who
heartless.
won the World Series last year? I forget.
It was the
Can you remind
Nats.
me? Oh, okay.
I'm saying when's the before that when they win?
But I
Before
forget.
that,
Shoot, I forget.
before
Can you
that,
remind me?
before that, when did they win?
It doesn't matter.
It
All
does
right.
matter. I'm saying that what if this is the exception and not the rule?
Okay, Cameron. Another thing that I thought was kind of funny with Jordan, sort of that's part of the documentary, the playoff series. He played golf with one of the players on the
They
other team
both, yeah.
the day before the game. That's crazy.
Danny Ainge.
Yeah,
My
that
God,
was
I
funny.
love Danny Ainge.
Yeah, but I thought that was funny, and there's
Then dropped
Shaq talking the whole time.
63 on him.
Yeah, if
And
he
then
had
he lost anyway, so it's
if he
okay.
had any sort of help that game or those 2 games, like I mean, they probably would have won. But he had no help, none.
I just wonder what it would have been like if they had gotten Pippen like
Like in
4
the
years
same draft
earlier.
class,
Yeah, and they had them
dude,
for
they would have
like
won
all
every
those years
single year.
together. It would have been like 15. It would have been like when the Yankees won like 27 straight. It would have been insane.
Yeah. Sort of a tangent, but it was part of the show that I thought was really interesting. I mentioned that I don't like watching NBA hardcore, but they actually introed with it the Paris series where they went to Paris and played the French team.
Oh
I
yeah.
thought that was really cool.
I didn't know teams did that.
Yeah, and I looked it up. Teams go and they play like other NBA teams. Like I think they did one in India. I think they go to China sometimes.
So
But
interesting.
I thought it was interesting that they played like the French team. I think that'd be really cool if they did more of that in the NBA today, sort of promote that the worldwide brand.
Well, I know they were doing that in China earlier, and then the Houston Rockets owner said those things about the Chinese government, and China was kind of like, "Don't come
Nope.
back." Yeah.
Yeah, but I just thought that was sort of cool, and I know the NFL goes to London, and the MLB is starting to expand a little bit more. But if they do that more and more, I think it's really cool to
It's
bring
interesting.
the whole world in.
It's interesting that the MLB is the last one to expand, because out of like the major sports in the United States, you'd think, right, MLB is probably the most popular worldwide, because soccer is not super popular in the United
Hmm.
States, professional at least.
Yeah,
So you'd think the MLB would be the quickest to expand.
that's true.
Um,
But yeah, they're getting started.
they're getting
Um,
started.
We're getting started. So another big storyline, and we talked about it a little bit, and we mentioned him in our intro. Jerry Cross, the
Jerry,
the GM,
my man.
he was sort of painted as sort of like a villain almost. Like
He was the
Jordan,
villain.
Jordan had some big problems with him. A lot of the players had some big problems with him. Watching that, I had some problems with him.
I had a lot of problems with him.
Yeah, what do you think?
Seem it seems like um he was just selfish is what it seemed like.
Yeah.
It looked like he wanted to be taking the credit for this dynasty rather than giving it to the players. And like, don't get me wrong, he did his job well.
Yeah.
Like, he's assembled this team, he put all the pieces together, but then he ruined it subsequently.
Hmm.
So I think he did his job, and the fact that he wasn't getting recognized for putting the pieces together, I think that bothered him.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. And I think another important part of a GM's job is to create a good culture and a good relationship between players and management and coaches and whatnot. And that's where he sort of struggled, just having that trust in players and whatnot. So, obviously he made some awesome moves. I mean, drafting Jordan, drafting Pippen, um, but he just wanted to take uh, all the credit when I, I I have to give it to the players. I mean, you give him some credit, but
Right.
I think he was being a little selfish.
Yeah. A little bit.
Yeah. Um, so Phil Jackson, obviously one of the best coaches of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he apparently did this thing where he had like themes for different seasons, and obviously this last one is the title of the documentary,
The
The
Last
Last
Dance.
Dance. Which is crazy that they they told him before the season, this is your last year, and he goes out and he wins it all. I think that's crazy.
When you have Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, it's kind of hard not to.
Yeah. But I'm a big Nats fan, so I relate everything back to the Nats.
Yes, you
Um,
do.
but it's sort of similar to what Davey Martinez did this year. He had that phrase, go 1-0 every day. I think this is good because as players, you have something to push for, and you have that like sort of saying in your head. You're like, all right, the last dance, I'm doing this, let's go. I think that sort of pushes them forward, and I think that's a really cool uh, aspect of Phil Jackson.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like he was obviously a very smart person, and he knew what he was doing, like not just in basketball and not just the schemes that he has to use against a zone or like a 2-3 or whatever, but also the politics of the business side of basketball, right? Because people often forget that basketball is largely and in most part a business, right? And there are a
Yeah.
lot of politics within that business. And Phil Jackson, I think, did the best possible job he could have of maneuvering through that web. It's not very often you get your team to play against the franchise, right? The Browns have been destroyed because they have bad management, because they have bad relationships, because of their front office has never gotten it together. Same thing for the Bengals.
Yep.
And the Bulls seem to be able to play through those problems. And I think Phil Jackson was able to find a way to keep their minds on basketball, even though they had all these insane things happening outside and in terms of the politics of it. And just the way he played it was perfect. There aren't many other people, coaches or not, who could have done that with a team, especially with people of that ego, right? Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan, and probably a few other of those players had at least some sort of ego by that point. I know they like to act like they didn't, and on the docuseries they were acting like these people, they were very selfless, and that's why the ball movement and the chemistry is working. And they were certainly significantly more selfless than some players. Russell Westbrook comes to mind. But at that point, there's still an ego, knowing that you're like one of the greatest. So being able to maneuver all of that by himself seems insane to me.
And another thing about Phil Jackson that I don't think gets talked about enough is he went from this job, managing Jordan and Pippen, to Kobe and Shaq. I mean, how often does that happen where you got just this amazing coach with this amazing player, and then his next job, amazing coach, amazing player? It doesn't happen too often. Another thing,
He's a talented guy.
I don't understand why they forced him out. I mean, I can sort of grasp the fact that maybe they see the players getting older and they want to move on or sort of rebuild or retool. But why do they have to force the coach out? I feel like the
It was the
coach.
tensions, like just the chemistry.
Yeah, that's probably true. But if you play it right as a GM, I feel like, I mean, the Patriots do this with Bill Belichick. You have that guy in there, and then you move the pieces around him to always compete. I don't
I
know.
mean, there were definitely a few times Jerry Krause did not make the right decision, and he
A
did not play
couple.
his cards right. So I think that was kind of just I think by that point he knew he lost the team, and he had already had a long-standing rivalry with Phil Jackson. So he's like, might as well act like I meant for this to happen the whole time, and just kind of pushed him out.
Mm-hmm. Um, one crazy thing that I thought that was crazy. Okay, whatever. Um, Scottie Pippen, his whole like collegiate career, where he started as like the equipment manager, and
Central
then
Arkansas, rip the
so
set.
some kids had some problems with scholarships, and he got one, and he grew like 5 inches over the summer, and then
Yeah,
he just becomes this
it
beast.
just kept growing, kept lifting.
Because he was a point guard or a guard before he grew, and then he obviously grew into a forward, but he still got that guard skills. So that it really made him a unique player.
I know that's what happened with Zion, where like his eighth grade year or his freshman year, he was like 6'3", and they figured, let's teach him the point guard skills now because he's going to be a fantastic point guard.
Yeah.
And by the time he could shoot well and handle well, he was 8 feet tall. He could lift a horse,
Yeah.
and he just kept those skills.
Yeah. Well, you got anything else to say? Sort of wraps up our little mini recap of
I
the
think I'm excited to see the other 8 episodes. I'm not quite sure. I mean, obviously, the first two episodes were more of an introduction to the whole idea of the Last Dance and setting the stage for the next eight. But I'm curious to see how they get 8 more hours out of this, because
Yeah.
I can't really see it in my head being like kind of trapped in that world for 8 hours and always being super interested. But I feel like there has to be. I don't know. I'm on the fence. I know there is 8 hours of amazing content. I just, and this might be in part because I wasn't there to experience it in person, but I don't understand, and I can't see where they're getting 8 more hours from. So I'm excited to see what kinds of episodes they have, like whether or not they look at specifically the relationship between Kraus and my boy Phil, or if they spend time only on bringing in free agents. I don't know, but I'm excited to see what they bring in for 8 more episodes.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of work with because it sounds like they're going back through Jordan's whole career instead of looking at this one season.
Yeah,
So they got a lot of material to work with, but we'll be here to cover it every week. We'll do a little recap like we did here. And
every week.
yes, next week we got a little surprise. We got our friend Austin coming in to talk a little basketball.
Huge NBA fan, very very good friend of ours.
Yep.
So
So
he'll provide his own interesting views on this documentary.
yeah.
And coming up on Friday, hopefully released by Saturday, will be our draft review and our reactions for that.
Yep. So we got stuff coming your way. Make sure to, as always, follow us on social media, the Field Guys. Like, subscribe, comment, ask us questions, interact, do whatever. Um,
Well, yeah, do
this is
whatever.
fun for us. We obviously like getting your guys' input, so make sure to let us know. Until next time, I guess we'll see you guys later.
Later.
See you.